Have you ever felt like you're living a life that doesn't truly belong to you? You still wake up early, go to work, interact, smile, everything seems fine, but in the quietest moments of the day, when your gaze turns inward instead of outward, a question quietly arises: who am I if I no longer had to play any role? That is not the question of someone who is lost. It is the whisper of the true self, after years of being buried beneath layers of masks, expectations, and roles. Perhaps you were never taught how to live as yourself, but you were thoroughly trained to live as others expected, to be polite, well-mannered, kind, likable, not a burden, never weak, and little by little, you strayed from your authentic nature until you became a product of society. Carl Jung called this process the disconnection from the self, the true self. You begin to lose your real feelings, real desires, and real voice. What takes their place is the persona, the social mask you wear each day to be accepted. And beneath that mask lies the shadow, all the parts of yourself you once rejected. Anger, vulnerability, pain, desire, rebellion, the parts you, or others, once deemed unworthy of existence. But no one can live forever in a performance. At some point, you'll feel empty, even if you seem to have it all. You'll repeat the same wounds, no matter how hard you try to change. Because when you are not living in alignment with your true being, life becomes a cycle, a loop that repeats until you finally pause and ask, is this really me? The journey you are about to enter is what Carl Jung called individuation. The process of reclaiming the true self, of integrating both light and shadow, of removing the mask and facing yourself fully. And this is not a journey to become perfect. It is a journey to become whole. 1. Persona, the social mask, a life built to please others. You weren't born with a mask, but very early in life, you were taught to wear one. Be obedient, and you'll be praised. Don't get angry, others won't like that. Don't disappoint anyone, be well behaved. Bit by bit, you learn to shrink your authentic self just to be considered acceptable. That's when the first mask was formed. Carl Jung called it the persona. Persona is the social shell, the image you present to the world to gain acceptance. It's the you at work, the you on social media, the you in your parents' eyes. It's not necessarily false, it's a calculated adaptation to survive in a collective. No one escapes the persona. Thanks to it, we can communicate, collaborate, be liked, and advance in society. The issue isn't wearing the mask. The issue is forgetting that you're wearing it. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you smiled politely when deep down you wanted to cry? How many times have you said, "It's fine," to keep the peace? While you were breaking inside, how many times have you stayed silent out of fear of being judged? Even when what you wanted to say was heartfelt and true, this is no longer intelligent communication, it's a life constructed to please others. When the persona stops being a supporting role and becomes the main act, you are no longer living, you're performing. And what's the cost of a life constructed this way? It's the feeling of becoming a stranger to yourself. You wake up every day and do everything right, but don't feel alive. You're recognized, but you don't feel present. You're fine in everyone's eyes, but quietly falling apart in your inner world. Carl Jung warned, the persona is what someone is not, but thinks they should be. It is not your enemy, it is a tool. But when you let a tool take over your being, you lose the right to be real, to be wrong, to be angry, to be vulnerable, to be conflicted. In short, you lose the right to be human. True freedom does not come from being accepted. It comes from no longer needing to hide. And to do that, you must begin peeling off the mask, even just a little. To ask yourself, beneath who I should be, who am I really? 2. Living forever in persona, the price of being assimilated by acceptance. Wearing a social mask isn't wrong, it's necessary to survive, integrate, and build relationships. But the real problem begins when you wear that persona for so long. You no longer know where the role ends and where your real self begins. This assimilation happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, but it is one of the deepest sacrifices a person can make. You believe that the more you match others' expectations, the more you'll be accepted. You learn how to adjust your words, expressions, and reactions to please each person. At home, you're the good child. At work, the agreeable coworker. In public, the polite and kind citizen. You become a master of role-playing, and each role gets reinforced with social rewards, praise, recognition, and the comforting sense that I belong. But what happens when night falls and all external noise fades? That's when you feel a quiet emptiness, a sense that you're alive but not truly yourself. You begin to wonder, are these thoughts in my head really mine, or just what I was taught to think? Are these dreams and desires truly mine, or just projections of my parents' or society's expectations? If I stop trying to please everyone, what will remain? The cost of being fully assimilated by the persona is inner fragmentation. You no longer hear your true voice. Every decision, no matter how small, gets filtered through, what will people think? Freedom becomes a luxury. Joy feels diluted because it doesn't stem from your essence, but from performing the role well. Living forever in the persona also leads to a more devastating consequence. You lose connection with your most primal emotions. You no longer know what you truly want. You stop being honest with your anger, your sadness, even your desire to rebel. Everything is normalized, but inside, your soul is slowly dying in silence. Carl Jung once warned, the person who cannot detach from the persona will never truly know who they are. When you live only for acceptance, you will always feel anxious, empty, and never enough. You keep chasing love from the outside, unaware that you've abandoned your own self somewhere along the way. And that is why the path back must begin with courage. The courage to peel off the persona, to accept even the parts of yourself you once hid or feared. Only then will you have a chance to finally meet yourself again. After years of getting lost in life's performance. Free. Shadow, the rejected darkness, the parts of you that were once denied. If the persona is the mask you wear to survive in society, then the shadow is everything you had to reject in order to keep that mask intact. Carl Jung described the shadow as an unconscious storage room, a place that holds everything you were taught is wrong, bad, or shameful. But being cast into the dark doesn't make these parts disappear. They merely continue to exist, silently, and often, secretly in control. From an early age, you were told, don't be selfish, don't get angry, don't be jealous, don't be weak. So whenever you felt competitive, you forced yourself to smile. Whenever you felt hurt, you chose silence. Whenever your thoughts diverged from the majority, you concluded something was wrong with you. Little by little, you built a psychological prison for your abandoned emotions. Eventually, you could no longer tell whether your anger was real or simply a reaction to old wounds. You didn't understand why a light criticism could crush you. You couldn't explain why envy toward others made you feel ashamed of yourself. All of these are signs that the shadow is alive. What's frightening is not that the shadow exists. What's frightening is being unaware of it. When you deny it, it manifests in distorted ways, through emotional outbursts, self-sabotage, or hurting those you love without knowing why. Jung called this projection, when you see in others what you don't want to admit about yourself. Yet paradoxically, within the shadow lie not just wounds, but also the most authentic, valuable parts of who you are. Maybe it's the rebellious streak you once suppressed, but which is now a powerful source of creativity. Maybe it's the sensitivity you were told was a weakness, but which holds the seed of deep compassion. Maybe it's the anger you tried to deny, but which is actually the energy that helps you set boundaries and protect yourself. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. No one can become whole without first facing the parts of themselves they once rejected. And that's why you must stop fearing your inner darkness, because the shadow is not your enemy. It is an unintegrated part of you, and only when you have the courage to look at it, not to flee, not to judge, can you truly begin your journey toward inner harmony. 4. When the shadow rises, outbursts, loops, in self-destruction, the shadow, the unconscious darkness, does not stay hidden forever. When it is denied for too long, it will find its way back one way or another, and that's when you begin to experience reactions you don't even recognize as your own. Uncontrolled anger, self-destructive decisions, recurring relationships that follow the same painful patterns. These are not coincidences. These are signs that the shadow is speaking. Have you ever lashed out over a seemingly harmless comment? Have you pushed someone away just because they got too close to a wounded part of you? Have you sabotaged a great opportunity because a part of you didn't believe you deserved it? These are not signs that you're a bad or broken person. They are the awakening of parts that have been suppressed for too long. Carl Jung warned, "Whatever is not brought to consciousness will return as fate." In other words, if you do not confront your shadow, it will control you from the background, and you'll call it fate, bad luck, or just the way I am. But in truth, it's simply an unhealed wound begging to be acknowledged. The danger of the shadow doesn't lie in its nature. It lies in your unconsciousness. When you don't understand what's influencing you, you get swept up by emotions, reactions, and behaviors beyond your control. And that is how you end up destroying what you love, only to live in regret. So many people are successful on the outside but crumbling inside. So many appear strong yet carry silent chains of unresolved pain. And many, no matter how hard they try, keep repeating the same cycles of failure because they've never faced their inner darkness. But the shadow is not a life sentence, it's an opportunity. Because inside every extreme reaction, inside every emotional eruption, is a signal. Look at me. I'm a part of you that's been abandoned too long. And if you're brave enough to not judge it, not fear it, but to simply listen, you'll begin reconnecting with yourself from the exact place where you were once broken. Darkness is only terrifying when it goes unrecognized. Once you bring it into the light, you will see it is no longer a monster. It is a forgotten child, just waiting to be held again. 5. Shadow is not the enemy. It's the gateway to your true self. In the subconscious of many, the shadow, the inner darkness, is something to avoid, to suppress, even to destroy. It's seen as the bad part, the dangerous part, the thing that makes me flawed. But that is a profound mistake, because as Carl Jung clearly stated, the shadow is not your enemy, it is a rejected part of yourself. And here's the paradox: you cannot discover your true self without walking through your own darkness. There is a sad truth. Many people believe that in order to become better, they must cut off the parts of themselves that society deems unacceptable. They try to eliminate envy, suppress anger, hide fear, and conceal true emotions. But the more they reject these parts, the more out of control they feel. Because what's denied doesn't disappear, it simply retreats deeper, demanding even more attention. Jung never viewed the shadow as an emotional trash heap. On the contrary, he saw within it untapped potential. Within suppressed anger may lie a long-neglected assertiveness. Within envy may lie a buried dream. Within fear may lie deep sensitivity and profound understanding. In other words, the shadow does not contain only darkness. It is the very place where light begins. It holds the rawest, most unpolished, most authentic parts of you, not yet shaped or dressed up for the world, but charged with the fiercest life energy. Accepting your shadow doesn't mean becoming bad. It means beginning to live consciously. You are no longer carried away by unconscious emotions, no longer reacting out of buried instinct. Instead, you become aware of what's moving inside you. You can see it, name it, and navigate it with intention. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming an integrated being. It's the process of bringing the shadow into light, integrating it with the persona, and slowly guiding you back to the self, your true identity. Not the person acting out roles to meet expectations, and not the person ruled by unhealed wounds, but a whole, unified, authentic being. The shadow is a doorway, not a wall. But to pass through it, you must be brave enough to face what you've long avoided. And the reward for that courage is not perfection. It is something far greater. To finally be yourself in the most complete, profound way. 6. Self, the true identity. Who are you when you're no longer playing a role? From childhood, you were taught to become someone. A good child, a model student, a polite person, and a kind human being. As you grew, the roles multiplied: the exemplary coworker, the ideal lover, and the well-mannered citizen. And in the endless pursuit of perfecting these expected versions of yourself, you were never given the chance to ask a very simple question: who am I if I no longer had to play any role? Carl Jung called the answer to that question the self, the true self. It is not the persona, the mask you present to the world. It is not even the shadow, the part you once rejected. The self is the integration of all your dimensions, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, the strength and the weakness, the logic and the emotion, The self is the real you, untouched by expectation, distortion, or trauma. But the self does not reveal itself easily. It doesn't come from reading a book, meditating for an hour, or listening to a few inspiring words. The self only emerges when you are brave enough to go inward, when you dare to face unhealed wounds, when you are willing to remove the persona you've worn for too long. When you look at your shadow without judgment. Jung believed that the deepest purpose of life is not success, but wholeness, not being better than others, but being completely, truthfully yourself. The self is not a destination, it is a process. Every honest decision, every moment you speak your truth, every time you choose your inner calling over external approval, is a step closer to the self. And here's the miracle: when you live authentically, life begins to feel real. Relationships deepen because you're no longer acting. Work becomes meaningful because you're no longer working for mere validation. Confidence no longer comes from achievements, but from an inner clarity. I know who I am. I am not perfect, but I am real. Jung once said, the self is the center, the totality, the intersection of consciousness and the unconscious. When you find the self, you no longer had to choose between reason and emotion, between duty and desire. You no longer need to split yourself to survive. You can finally be fully present, in one piece. And from that moment on, you stop trying to become someone. You simply begin to be yourself. And that alone is profound enough to fulfill a lifetime. 7. Archetypes, the unconscious patterns that shape you. You may think you are living by personal will, but beneath the surface of your conscious mind, there are invisible forces shaping the way you love, fear, react, and dream. Carl Jung called them archetypes, ancient psychological patterns that exist across all cultures and operate quietly within the human psyche. Archetypes are not specific characters. They are primordial spiritual blueprints, the foundational architecture of the human soul. You may not know their names, but you've met them in your dreams, in films, in the fairy tales you loved as a child, and most of all, in the roles you unconsciously inhabit every day. When you constantly push to be strong, to win, to assert yourself, perhaps the hero archetype is driving you. When you always put others' needs first, forgetting your own in order to care, you may be living in the caregiver. When you rebel, challenge the system, reject all norms, the rebel archetype may be speaking through you. The danger does not lie in which archetype you carry, but in completely identifying yourself with only one. The hero collapses in moments of weakness. The caregiver becomes exhausted and resentful when unable to receive. The rebel, forever in opposition, may never build anything lasting. And some archetypes lie buried, not because they don't exist, but because society does not allow them to exist. For example, the creator may be suffocated in a world of rigid practicality. The trickster, the mischievous, playful part, gets silenced by moral rigidity. Yet these neglected archetypes, when awakened and integrated, can help you live more fully, flexibly, and truthfully. Archetypes are pieces of your inner design, and you cannot understand yourself if you do not understand the forces operating within you. Jung called them the spiritual heritage of humanity, the shared emotional and psychological foundation of us all, regardless of origin. When you learn to listen to and integrate the archetypes within you, you no longer live in inner chaos or contradiction. You are no longer pulled by unconscious roles, but instead become the author of your own psychic script. This is a profound step in the journey back to the self, where all parts no longer clash, but harmonize like a vivid symphony composed of your own essence. 8. Without individuation, you live a repetitive life of disconnection and wounds. Not everyone lives awake. Most people go through their entire lives without ever truly facing themselves. They live according to what they were taught, encouraged to do, or socially accepted. They behave properly, fulfill roles, and follow patterns, but deep inside them, a quiet, persistent voice asks, is this really the life I chose? Carl Jung called the process of reclaiming the true self individuation, the journey of becoming fully yourself. But if you choose not to walk this path, the price doesn't come suddenly. It is subtle, quiet, and deeply familiar. It shows up when you have everything yet feel empty. You achieve what is considered success, a stable job, a good reputation, an ideal partner, but you don't feel happy. Because deep down, you know You've succeeded in a role but failed with yourself. Without individuation, you recycle the same emotional wounds. You choose the same kind of lovers and fall into the same toxic dynamics. You reject opportunities that make your heart stir out of fear of failure. You envy those who live authentically, and then shame yourself for not being brave enough to do the same. You try to fix your life, but in truth, you're just patching a house built on the wrong foundation. When you don't face your shadow, it continues to control you. When you don't remove your persona, you keep living to please others. When you don't understand your archetypes, you get pulled back into roles you're tired of playing, and so each day becomes a replica of the last, except you grow more impatient with yourself. Jung once said, "The greatest suffering of humanity comes not from circumstances, but from living out of alignment with one's true nature." And the cruelest part is this: society will never warn you, because a person disconnected from themselves is easy to control, easy to assimilate, easy to accept anything, even a life they never truly chose. But if you are brave enough to pause and look inward, you'll realize that every signal within you, the boredom, confusion, restlessness, is not a flaw. It is a calling to return. And if you don't listen, those calls will only grow louder until they force you to stop. Individuation is not a luxury. It is your most basic right, the right to live a life that is real. And if you don't take this journey, you won't disappear right away, but you will never truly arrive. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to constantly push yourself to be loved, nor suppress every emotion just to be accepted. You only need to become yourself, truthfully, clearly, and fully. But this simple truth is also one of the hardest things to live, because it requires you to let go of everything that once made you feel okay. You must let go of the persona, the mask that helped you survive. To dare to live authentically, you must face the shadow, the part of you that you once rejected. To finally see the forgotten pieces within yourself, you must make peace with the archetypes, the unconscious patterns that drive you, so you are no longer a puppet of your own psyche. And above all, you must accept that the journey back to your true self is neither easy nor fast, but it is the most meaningful thing you could ever do for yourself. Carl Jung didn't teach us how to win. He showed us that true freedom doesn't come from external control, but from inner harmony. And only when you recognize who you are, can you begin to live a meaningful life, not according to someone else's standard, but according to the honesty of your own soul. The world does not need you to be perfect. The world needs you to be real, even if that means breaking the safety of your roles. Because once you truly live as yourself, you don't just change your life, you become a living invitation for others to do the same. And if you're still hesitating, still afraid to remove the mask, remember this: you don't need to be accepted to exist. You only need to be seen by yourself for the first time. Truly.